Welcome back to Grand Theft. Well, tonight's guest is author extraordinaire. His name's Connor Boyack. He's made many books for children. He also makes books for adults. We can get into that. Connor, how you doing this evening? Great to see you. And thank you for making time in your schedule for sharing the wisdom about why you do all these books and why you are such a prolific publisher of freedom-based intellectual content for young folks.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to chat. And yeah, I got a fire in my belly for this stuff. So I look forward to talking with you about it.
All right. So my first question is, public school or homeschool, how did you come into this world and learn how to read and write?
So I was a graduate of the public school system, as I like to call it. I grew up in San Diego. My mom apologizes to this day that I wasn't homeschooled. It wasn't really a thing in California in the 80s and early 90s. So she was never really exposed to it. And in retrospect, she wishes she would have. But yeah, no, I hated school. I cheated all the time, slept through class, really disliked. What's funny is that there were 3 subjects through school and then even into college that I did the worst in: English, history, and economics. And those are like the 3 subjects that I'm now most passionate about and prolific in. And so the world has a sense of irony, it seems. But no, I really disliked school.
I also appreciate the sense of irony and the fact that you're not up to speed on those things going through the public school system. Then you write a book, the Tuttle Twins go to, Federal Reserve, Jekyll Island, right? So you're discussing, or Hayek's Road to Serfdom, you're discussing these complex intellectual adult ideas in a way that parents can read them to their children and both learn together and have that experience for the rest of their life. So coming out of the public school system and having cheated, I got a quick tangent. What was your favorite way to cheat? And I'll tell you mine.
I even through college, I distinctly remember being at a test in college, and I would write in like mechanical pencil, font size 2. I mean, just super tiny text, all the key, whatever information I needed, and I would fold that, and I would slip that tiny piece of paper into my belt buckle. And so, because at my university, they had a testing center, all the tests were done, and they could like monitor everything and record everything. And it was a whole deal. And I was able to evade capture with my little belt buckle folded piece of paper.
That's pretty hardcore right there. All right. So mine was, I had a TI calculator. This is before graphics calculators. If you write with a mechanical pencil on the inside of the back cover, generally you can't see it except at the right angle of reflection. And then when they came out with the graphics calculator, which was like my first years of trig and calculus, I discovered you could put the equations in there. You could program them in there. And then I found by programming the equations in there, I didn't need to cheat and look at I didn't find myself looking them up during the test because I had taken the time to put them in there. And then I kind of discovered, oh, you're going to do the work one way or the other. You're going to do one of, you're trying to do it under duress while you're cheating, or you could just do it beforehand. And then I just kind of evolved into a better way of my self-learning.
That's great.
System. All right. So now you get out of public school system. Did you go to college? Did you get a job? What was your path?
So I did. I was on the conveyor belt. I was expected to go to college. It was the thing you do. I had no reason to question it. I got a degree, spent 4 years and a lot of money on a piece of paper I, in retrospect, did not need. No employer ever cared about. My path was I was in web development. I created websites, learning computers, and I distinctly remember sitting in classes working as a freelancer for clients on projects while in class, being taught by some professor who's 40 years older than me, and he has to brush up on the latest technology, while I have the profit motive incentivizing me to go learn on Google the same stuff. And I'm sitting in a class learning from someone who isn't really the greatest authority figure, things that the internet was freely able to teach me. And I remember having those thoughts. Never did they prompt any action. It was always just like, this is kind of dumb. And I would just tune out the teacher and work on my projects and earn money and pay down my debt. But no employer ever cared about my college degree. Every employer only cares about your last job. And so it's always a question of really just getting the first job. And in my case, my first employer didn't care about the degree. They handed me a little worksheet and said, do you know what these things mean? And do you know how to do that? And I showed them my technical competence of building, various HTML website stuff, and passed their little exam with flying colors. And off I went to the races. They didn't care about if I knew biology or if I, studied Plato or any of that kind of stuff. So in my case, it was a waste of time. Hence why I put together a book a couple of years ago called Skip College, to make the case for why most people don't need to go. But yeah, that was my experience.
All right. So I'm echoing your experience because I went through college. I found out during college the degree I was getting was not going to help me do the thing I wanted to do. I learned to do it during college, started making money during college. I did get the degree, but I never had to use it for any of the jobs I got. And we hire a lot of people over the past several years, and we've never asked anyone about a college degree or any of that type of stuff. It's more like core competencies. Like, can you show up for yourself consistently and not quit on yourself? And if you could do that, then we could probably work and play well together, and we can train you on what you need to know to get this part done for this client, right? So you learned at an early age, earlier than most, because I teach a lot of adults that are still learning this as well. So you learned at an early age the value of being able to make your offer to the market. You made your offer to that web developer without even graduating, it sounds like, because you were pulling in client money while you were still working on your degree. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was very much this slow effort because no one sat me down to translate. There was no interpreter to be like, here's what this means. Like, you're making money while in class, paying money to learn things. Like, no one really distilled that down to smack me in the head and say, like, maybe you can, take a different action here. It was just these like organic experiences that was happening that, unfortunately for me, only later in life, in retrospect, did I realize what was going on. And so I feel like part of my work is to try to be that, like, planting warning signs along the conveyor belt so parents or the kids themselves can be like, hey, maybe consider something different here. There may be a different course of action that's better for you, both in the short and the long term. But without those warning signs, without like jarring people awake and really getting them to assess their situation, they'll just continue on the societal conveyor belt that leads to, path to nowhere for a lot of kids. So that's a lot of what I try to do, is just plant those, warning signs in the ground for people to encounter.
Yeah, I think that's really worthwhile. I have a friend and client who has a course called Test Drive Your Future, and it sounds like maybe we should cross market, because people who read your book would be interested in the course. People who take the course would be interested in your book. It would give them more than one point of reflection to consider, because I know a lot of times when families are considering it, the peer pressure and the indoctrination is so heavy that one little crack in the dam, as it were, won't let the water through. But if they see it from multiple sources, if you see Seth Godin, you see Gatto, you see your book, and you see a course that can help you make better decisions on a child's future, that's like a storm coming together, and it's a storm of creativity. It's a storm of freedom where the child gets their free will back, possibly for the first time in their whole education career. So I think that's really important.
What's interesting about what you're saying is I've seen this true in marketing. It requires so many touches to get people to take action. And I've seen a lot of people get frustrated when they're like, oh, I wrote that op-ed and no one responded, or I put up this website, or I ran Facebook ads, or I did a book club and, nothing happened. I ran for office. No one voted for me. And it's like, my granddad, he would always use acronyms, KTYL, know that you're loved. Like everything was an acronym. That was his thing. The one that I kind of remember and put in practice the most was PPPG. Persistence pays pretty good. And that for me has become a life motto, because to get people to take action, you do need to encounter them at different times in different ways, so that their kind of calorie preserving brain that's trying to preserve their scarce attention only for the things that matter decides to consciously pay attention to what you're doing. And it can take a while to kind of penetrate people's minds and get them to really seriously focus on something, because we're bombarded with inputs and advertisements and everything else. So a lot of what we do is, how do we build sustainable marketing campaigns? Because the message matters. We know that the content can improve people's lives. We know that this stuff will make a positive impact for people. So we owe it to them to build a very sustainable plan to market to them in different ways at different times over long-term periods, so that they finally, in our case, get the Tuttle Twins books, read as a family, have family discussions, and have amazing experiences together as a family. That means I have to be very proactive and diligent in saying, I can't just put up a random Facebook ad and think that'll solve the world and I'll reach a ton of people. I have to build a marketing machine, because I owe it to those people to figure out how I can sustainably market to a ton of people over a long period of time. And so it's required me, as the graduate of the public school system who, didn't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body in the early days, to figure out a lot of this and learn marketing and human psychology and how, and it's been very rewarding and fulfilling. And it's something I feel like a lot of us who are trying to be freedom fighters and spread the word, and others, like, we can't be a flash in the pan. We can't assess our impact based off of one little project. We have to keep at it and be here for the long term to really make a difference.
Yeah. So starting off with that drip, drip, drip mentality of, it might not, any day your given actions might not amount to a hill of beans, but over time, those drips do amount to substantial sea level changes in people's consciousness, right? And what you're saying is, like, there's a lot of bombardment. You get events in your email, and there's stuff going on today. And this is not a one-time thing. This is not a one-time interest. What you're saying is, this is important enough to tell you a little bit about it every week for the next 18 years of your child's life, because from the time they're born to the time they leave your guardianship, basically, you're responsible for helping them formulate these ideas without contradictions, to have understanding, to be able to measure their logic and reason against irrational reactions to the world that wants you to react. They need you to react. That's the realm of control. The assumptions where we don't ask the questions are the parts where they really get us. So to give young people the ability to see things, to like Aristotle said, if I pick up this pen, I don't have to become this pen. I could just observe it and then I can put it down, right? Not to become the things we observe right away, and not to adopt them right away as our own beliefs, but to go out and use our five senses to collect information from the environment. So by your recollection, learning how to kind of ad hoc do this consistently with little mentorship from your grandfather and these, PPPG, right? Articulate that again.
That's persistence pays pretty good.
Persistence pays pretty good. Those types of ideas eventually codified and took you on your own unique path, right? You stopped kind of just doing the work that's offered out there for a paycheck. And you said, oh, I have something bigger that I see needs to be done in the world. I don't see anybody doing it to my specifications. Let's go put ourselves in the midst of that and become everything we need to know to do that at a level of excellence, and to do that excellence and deliver that excellence consistently over years, which few people have the discipline to do. So from my background, when I was in college, I got into a franchise. I had a professional mentor that was a great relationship. It was like explicit, on purpose. I signed up, I went through the training, these sort of things. You did it on yourself, on your own, kind of learning how to get paid from the market. And then when did you make that right turn toward Albuquerque, as Bugs Bunny used to say, and discover this whole new world of publishing and marketing and learning how to embrace sales? Because a big thing most people deal with is aversion to sales and marketing. And I'm like, you're always going to be tied to a paycheck mentality, then that golden handcuffs. And you brought yourself out of that. So did you have entrepreneurs in your family? How did you get inspired to take that step? Where'd you get the courage?
Well, for me, it kind of boils down to that old adage that when the student is ready, the mentor will appear. And we can teach kids and force them to learn. So it's going to go in one ear, out the other, pump and dump. It's not meaningful to them. I talk at a lot of homeschool conferences and a lot of parent groups as well. And one of the common threads that I see is a frustration for parents that are like, why isn't my kid willing to learn biology or, calculus, or, man, it's such a struggle to get them to do their, math memorization. And I'm like, you shouldn't force this stuff. They're not ready for it. Later in life, like, let's say they want to go start an Etsy store and sell bracelets. Well, now they got to figure out e-commerce and money and budgeting and spreadsheets. And they will learn all of that in like 1 week, when you could have tried to take 4 years through curriculum to cram this down their throats when it had no context. So don't be concerned that your kids aren't learning things when they need to. Recognize that as humans, when we have a motive, right, when we are motivated by a certain outcome, all the work that goes into achieving that is not drudgery. It is just essential. It's often enjoyable because it's all in pursuit of this effort that we're trying to do. So I have this model called passion-driven education, where I think we need to reframe all of education around child's interests, because when we are motivated by something, we will consume all kinds of information. It is relevant to us. It's meaningful. When my son loves Pokemon and I'm like, hey, let me teach you about the business behind Pokemon, or let's help you learn how to illustrate or how animation works, or let's look at how they made their Pokemon website. Let's talk about HTML or graphic design. I can bring up any subject under the sun. And as long as it is tied to Pokemon, in this example, my son is interested simply because I'm using a language that he is naturally curious about. I'm helping him better understand a world he wants to further explore, even if it's an adjacent topic, but it's remotely connected to Pokemon. And this was something I struggled with in the early years because I also, as a homeschool dad, I'm like, my kid's got to learn all the things. And then I'm realizing, no, I'm trying to push on them the same approach that I got in the public school system. I need to reframe this. And so I read a lot. And to your point, to your question, like for me, it was kind of a lonely journey. My mentors were really authors. It was reading, marketing books, or it was reading, John Taylor Gatto, or it was reading psychology books and trying to get from a lot of different kind of expert sources, their input. I did not really have anyone in my life directly who was that guide for me. It was after college and then getting married and having my first kid. It was this intense period of study, self-education, really to try and say, okay, I'm now articulating what my goals are. I now see kind of a path ahead that I want to go. I have no clue how to do that. Like I started a think tank a decade ago. I had no clue how to run a business or a nonprofit or how to fundraise or any of that. But I had a motive. I had a desired outcome. And so all the learning that went into me being able to do that was amazing because it was motivating. Every little step of progress was like, yeah, I'm doing it. Yeah, I'm doing it. And I sucked in all kinds of information that I otherwise, would have hated. My mom was back in San Diego where we grew up, where I went to school. She ran into my 8th grade English teacher. And this is years later, right? Like 20 years later or whatever. And, how's Connor doing? And I'm like, wait, she remembered me? Like, that's either a really good thing or a really bad thing that your 8th grade teacher, English teacher. So my mom at the time, I'd written like a dozen books and, Connor, and her mind was just like, like that does not compute because Connor was not the greatest of students. But again, for me, it was the outcome and the motivation. I want to make a change in the world. I want to change hearts, minds, and laws. I want to make a difference. I want to influence the political process. I want to, wake families up to the way the world actually works. And so because those are my goals, I figured out how to write well. I read a ton of books. I learned kind of through osmosis from good authors how to construct persuasive arguments. I blogged, I failed, but it was the motivation, and I had to figure that out. And the biggest problem I have, and I'll end my rant here because I could be on the soapbox for a while. My biggest concern I have with the modern schooling system is it's extremely demotivating for kids. We are suppressing their curiosity. We are not honoring their individuality. We're not letting them figure out what their path in life is. We're instead placing them on that conveyor belt where they have to be homogenized and conformed into the same predictable output as everyone else. And it leads to situations like mine where it's only later in life that I figure out what my path is, what my motivations are, and then all that learning kind of comes in super easy. For my kids, for other kids, I want to help them discover early on in the process, and it changes over time, but like, what are your motivations? What are your desires? And then let's build an educational experience around you that supports you and what your goals are. And that's where my like core passion is right now.
Well, I think this conversation is therapeutic and offering inspiration and optimization for parents right now. It's triaging their situation. Some of them haven't thought about any of these things, man. They don't know your books. They don't know your angle. They don't know what you've figured out and mastered over the past decades. So to bring the story in a chronological order, you're at the part where you're figuring out your motivation, and that motivation sends you on a unimpeded growth and flourishing exploration where you're able to follow your passion and you're figuring this stuff out on your own. And you want to do this thing. So you decided that, and then you figure all these other things out along the way. You don't let it stop you. You made a decision. Then you're like, I just know how to learn stuff and I'm going to plug it in as I go. And I think that's very healthy. I think that's very natural. I think very few people ever get that chance in their lives. But along that way, you self-actualized. You found your life partner. You started a family. You started to shoulder that responsibility and not be withered and crushed from it. But you started getting bigger muscles and you started growing your brain and you started really focusing your motivations and your time and taking like full advantage of your 168 hours in a week. Can you describe that process? And was it like a personal social thing that triggered the motivation, or was it the motivation and everything else just came together because you're in the right mindset to see opportunity? What was that critical igniting point for you?
That's a great, tantalizing question. I think as I reflect upon my life, what it is that I set big goals that created big challenges that manifested big gaps in my own ability and thinking and fortitude that set me down the path of saying, okay, like, how do I close those gaps? There's a concept, and Ryan Holiday wrote this book, the Stoic guy. It's called The Obstacle is the Way, right? This concept that so often in life we try and take the path of least resistance. We want the paycheck, we want the 9 to 5, we want the security blanket, the social safety net, we want the predictability, right? And we avoid these obstacles because entrepreneurship is hard, or I don't know the unknown, too much risk, or I don't want to, and I love this concept that the obstacle is the way. To use your case about, the muscles getting big and I'm really kind of bulking up or whatever. It's like, how do you do that? It's through resistance, right? You cannot bulk up without resistance. We get stronger in proportion with the obstacle that we're pushing against. And so what I tell my team is like, we have these massive boulders in place of where we're trying to go. We shouldn't be thinking about how we can like go around them and create a little path around them. Instead, it's let's push against that boulder. Let's figure out what it is about that obstacle that we can leverage into a strength, because the more we push against it, the stronger we get, to the point where then we have sufficient strength to move it out of the way. But then as we proceed down the path, we're stronger for it and we can accomplish more and go further faster. And so we should see that the obstacle is actually an opportunity. It identifies for us a potential weakness that we can really attack and leverage into a strength by really applying ourselves and trying to overcome it. So again, the challenge for me is I didn't really have anyone to sit me down and like a coach. I never thought about hiring a business coach or any of this kind of stuff. I was like stumbling through and getting little like bits like from different books and YouTube videos or whatever. My process was very organic and hodgepodge to get here. But I was like, it's like panning for gold, right? It's a volume play. The more pans of dirt you get, the more specks you're going to find. So it really becomes this question of like, how much dirt can you get through this process to find all the specks of gold? For me, my journey was the volume play as well. It was watching tons of videos, reading tons of books, extracting little tidbits here and there until things were starting to click. And only later did I figure out like, oh, there's this idea of like masterminds or business coaches or other places where you can get like very focused information to help you level up. And so now I've got like, two coaches that I have. I'm in like 2 other networking groups, always trying to invest in myself, rub shoulders with other people who are on similar wavelengths, because what's that concept? It's like you're the sum of your 5 closest, people that you associate with. And so really trying to say like, are my social circles and my circumstances reflective of the big goals that I have? Well, if not, let me change who I'm around. Let me change the inputs that I'm taking into my brain, what my mindset is. It's a lot of that like work in yourself to figure out, if I want to accomplish big things, what got you here won't get you there. And so I need to figure out what more I need to do and invest in myself to get there. I was on the phone the other day with a CEO. I was telling them all the goal systems I use and all the thing. And he's like, you give me anxiety with all this stuff. But for me, it's like, again, I know what I'm trying to do. I know that these are massive goals to reach and teach millions of kids and change the world for the better. And it requires me to go through that process of self-discovery. It requires me to overcome my weaknesses. It requires me to learn and be the best I can so that me and my team can accomplish those goals. I can't just like laze my way into success. I have to push against that boulder until I develop the strength to push it aside. So again, organic hodgepodge process for me. Part of what I try to do with coaching, mentorship, public speaking is accelerate that journey for other people and point them to like the key resources or books, or just distill for them my own thoughts and learning. So hopefully I can accelerate someone else's journey.
Yeah. I mean, the point you're making over and over is that if you want growth, you're going to have to go do some things that are uncomfortable, that make you anxious, that there's a lot of uncertainty. There might be risk involved. And once you trigger that complexity to say, I'm going to go learn about this thing or participate in this thing and learn along the way, or do this, do the actions that eventually lead you to a goal, right? So you're willing to trigger complexity and go into those unknown areas. And that's great. And then you said this word goal. And I want to break that open, because with the idea of where you want to go comes all the steps and the accountability and these sort of internal disciplines that a lot of people who go through the public school system, like we did, never had a chance to internalize and fortify. So at some point you started making goals. Do you remember when and how old you were when you started having goals and holding yourself accountable, or having a coach hold you accountable?
It was only about 1.5 years ago. I long resisted goals. I hated New Year's resolutions because my mom would make me go through that process and I'd forget about them. And every year it was always the same thing. What are you going to work on this year? Like I'd forget within 2 weeks, and I had no system. I had no Also, I didn't really see the value. I was just on my path organically, living life, and I really didn't see the vision. But it was about a year and a half ago that I said, no, I joined all these networking groups. I got 2 coaches, really, because I kind of stumbled into success in some ways. Like I've got a core set of skills and I'm pretty competent and good at what I do. And so great, I've had success. But then we went through a process, a year ago with our team to like say, okay, what do the next 3 years look like? How are we going to level up? We followed a book called Vivid Vision by Cameron Herold. Basically, it's 3-year goal planning, but like, how are you going to stretch yourself over the next 3 years? And I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be part of this, if I'm going to help like grow this thing there, I can't just lollygag my way and continue to like poke at different issues. I've got to be very strategic. I have to be very intentional. I have to figure out who are the people that can help me accomplish these goals. What value for them can I create in their own life? So I'm not just saying, gimme, gimme, gimme. And really doing the work on my own mindset, because when you set that big goal, when you stand before this massive boulder, that's extremely intimidating. No wonder everyone wants to get the path of least resistance and go around the boulder. Who wants to like try and push against this thing for weeks and months on end? And so for me, it's that internal mindset of like, no, I've got to be willing to like face these head on. I got to be thankful for them, grateful for my obstacles, because they present for me an opportunity to, analyze my own deficiencies, overcome them, work through them, and become the better for it. And so I shouldn't avoid those things. I should see them as blessings and opportunities to improve. That takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of, external perspective from coaching and others who are on that similar type of path or journey to kind of share their own experience and like, oh yeah, okay, I want to take that little bit from him. And I liked what that person said, customize my own process. So it's only been fairly recently, but I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of having systems around your goals. I read Atomic Habits, another fantastic book. I've incorporated a lot of that. Tiny Habits is another good one. But again, just trying a Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod is another one, like really starting your morning off on the right foot. I set I had a bunch of goals. One of them was I want to do 75 push-ups. When I started, I could do 8, and now I can do 60. And I actually have pecs for the first time, in my life. Like, wow. And I'm on my way to 75. But again, like it's that intention of saying like, what do I want to do? And then what am I going to sacrifice in order to accomplish those goals? I never really grew up this way. I didn't really have, other than the New Year's resolutions, I didn't have people in my life who were really helping me do this. And so even yesterday, I had lunch with a gentleman where we're brainstorming the idea of creating like a teen mentorship program to identify the young people across the country who really want to invest in themselves, apply themselves, get these lessons in an accelerated fashion from people who are already down the path. This stuff excites me because I didn't have that. And so I want to give back and be able to help other people achieve the levels that they want.
Do you think that Sisyphus was happy? Do you think it's a position like, I'm being somewhat facetious. Some people look at Sisyphus and be like, oh man, that guy's got to do hard work all the time. It's always an uphill battle for him. And I see him as like, oh, that guy's building himself. He's a baller. He's out there, like no one's making him push that rock. He's doing it. Like it's a metaphor you can try on in one of many ways. And if you're in a victim mentality, you see it as maybe a victim reflection. And if you're someone who's into building yourself mentally or physically or both, you might see it as like a reminder of the daily challenge, right? I don't think I'm that smart today because I remember how much I learned since yesterday, and I get up and I try to do all the hard things in front of me. And I believe that the obstacle is obviously the path, because all the best things in life are on the other side of those obstacles. And a lot of those obstacles are blocked by fear or misconceptions of what you think are hard work or what hard work is. I think hard work is fun when I'm directing it myself and I find meaning and substance in it. It's the thing I have the most vigor for. So these occasions in life to be able to trigger our complexity come about because people like you and me, we learned how to invest in ourselves over time, and to say, oh, public school system, shame on you. University system, kind of shame on you. I have bigger and better things I want to do in the world. I'm going to go accumulate the knowledge, wisdom, experience, and skills I need to do those things and to achieve the goals. So you had this idea of goals. You didn't have formal accountability or coaching. You're making your way through, you're finding success, and that is its own reward on the other side of the hard work. And did that invigorate you and bring you optimism? Or was it like, this is okay, but there's some other calling in life? Did you ever have confusion over what your meaning and your goals were?
Well, I tell people that I'm a drug addict, and I say, my drug of choice is not the stuff that Hunter Biden is using or anything else crazy. My drug of choice is dopamine. And so to answer your question, from an early day when I'll go back a ways. The thing that set me on this path of starting a think tank and the books and everything else was the raid against the Yearning for Zion Ranch in 2008, I believe it was, 2007 maybe. This was a polygamous compound in Texas. The Warren Jeffs, FLDS community, super skeezy kind of stuff. And there was a fraudulent tip, fake call that was placed that cops thought at the time was true, that, you know, there was abuse happening. And so based on that false tip, they invaded, you know, SWAT teams, guns, armored personnel carrier tanks. I think there was a helicopter or two, just they swarmed in. They took out all the kids out of the whole community. There were like 400 plus kids, took them away from their moms, put them in the foster care system where there's drugs and sex abuse and, you know, kids getting impregnated and just all kinds of problems. They literally kidnapped these kids. They put them with these foster kids, these strangers, for months before the moms could get them back. And I remember watching this. I was newly married, didn't have any kids, and I watched this all unfold. And I was like, this is a travesty of justice. Like, don't want to in any way condone the alleged, you know, corruption of this Warren Jeffs guy and child brides and everything else. Absolutely go after that. But all these kids to like just kidnap them and take them away from their moms, like that's ridiculous. So I got really fired up. This is again, like 15 years ago, before there were like online petitions and all these, you know, change.org and all these things. I started an online petition. And I called on, you know, whatever, the Texas governor, the FBI, whoever it was, like, you know, release the kids or send them back to their parents. And it was just like a spur of the moment thing. I was like, someone ought to do something. Oh, maybe that should be me. So I started speaking out. I got my first TV interview. I got interviewed by the local news that we had passed 1,000 petition signatures. I started getting all these letters from congressmen that I had written to. I mean, it was their staff writing it, obviously. But like, I'm starting to like get involved a little bit. I was blogging about this on a blog I used to have. People are swarming the comments with gratitude. A lot of them were like polygamous people all over the country who felt, you know, misrepresented, or that no one would stand up for them because it's kind of weird, right? And so they were thankful that someone would stand up. They were like, even if I didn't succeed at anything, they were just so grateful that someone was willing to fight for them. And that was like the first like hook for me of like, oh wow, like I stood up and maybe I lost, but like I did it and people were grateful for it. And I have kind of a good skill here, you know, public speaking and technical, whatever, to set up a petition and a website and marketing and whatever. And so that was my first taste of it. And so fast forward 15 years, every day I'm getting texts and tweets and DMs and emails from parents, especially, who are just so deeply grateful for our Tuttle Twins books and how they're impacting their kids, the conversations that they're having with their kids, the aha light bulb moments, the fact that the kids are now like way more, you know, cognizant of what's going on in the world, and the parents feel like they can relate to their kids more and have these like amazing discussions. I get this every day, and I'm addicted to that drug. And so the answer to your question is this: is that like from that early day, I tasted what it was like to help other people and to have a set of skills and develop a set of skills that would allow me to be of service to others who felt like no one was standing up for them. So a lot of our political work that we've done with our think tank, a lot of the laws that we've changed are catering to communities and businesses and industries and others that don't really have anyone fighting for them. That is what I love to do, is standing up for the little guy. And I'm addicted to dopamine. I want it all day long, being able to impact people's lives. And like, who doesn't want that, right? We all do. And so I just feel very blessed and fortunate to be in a position where our work is making such a difference. And I have that direct feedback loop to our community where I'm hearing that. And it just motivates me every day to wake up. I'm fired up and ready to go because I crave more of it.
Well, it's exciting because you found your calling. You got all these books. I want to start. Let me zoom out real quick. Tuttle Twins and the Law. They learn about the law. Now, why would, in my case, this is one of the first 3 books I bought for my son before he was born. I bought this, the Trivium, the Quadrivium. I was like, between this, you're all set. Just read these 3 books, kid. When you're old enough, read these 3 books, you'll be all set. What would make you want to take something as complex and maybe even foreign to modern readers as the law and bring it to young people through their parents at story time via the Tuttle Twins?
So I was running this think tank, and my kids at this time were 5 and 3. And I would come home and I'd ask my kids, how was your day? What did you do? Oh, I played all day or whatever, right? But my 5-year-old started to ask me, Dad, what did you do today? And I'm like, how do I talk to my kid about, fighting eminent domain or, a tax increase on the ballot or whatever? So I went to Amazon and I looked for books that would help. I mean, there's potty training books, there's birds and the bees, but there's books for everything that you want to talk to your kids about, except for principles of truth and justice and freedom and all the rest. So I was talking with my buddy Elijah, who is our illustrator. He's a dad of a bunch of kids as well. And we were kicking around this idea, like, what would that be like to talk to kids about these ideas? Maybe we should do a kids book. And he and I had known each other for a couple of years. We had sensed in each other like a simpatico, similar vibe. We're like, we should work together on something. So this project presented itself, and we had no vision for what it has become. We just thought, hey, let's do a book. That would be a fun project. And so we decided, look, if we're going to do just one book, if it falls flat, no one wants it, whatever, but we want to create it, what would we do? And for both of us, Frederick Bastiat's essay, The Law, there's a little illustration of Bastiat right there. The Law was a very influential essay for both of us in our own kind of, red pill process. And so we wanted to honor Bastiat and also expose his ideas to a much wider audience by turning those ideas into a children's story where they could learn about, justice and law and natural rights and all the rest. Of course, a lot of people bought the book, said, when are you doing the next one? And so we slowly started doing more until things just massively exploded for us in the past couple of years. And now we've done over 4.5 million books. We've got books for toddlers and teens and curriculum and a game and a cartoon, and just trying to grow a content empire so that kids of all ages and their parents as well find these ideas accessible and interesting and relevant to their lives.
Yeah. And it's one of those ideas that if you wrote it down on paper, it might not be impressive, but it certainly is impressive in action, because what you've taken is, Frederick Bastiat from 1801 to 1850, he wrote a lot about liberty and justice and rights. And he's right up there in my book with Lysander Spooner and Etienne de la Boétie, right? These types of treatises on human servitude, voluntary, involuntary, what our freedoms are so, they're like the high watermark of philosophy in these areas, and they're not accessible today to most adults. And you've made them accessible again to adults and children through your books, these types of ideas. Like, I've podcasted on this to adults who are super nerdy and tried to explain these things, right? But you have taken the time to understand its relevance, priority, substance, meaning, and then translate it into something that parents can read to their children and everyone can understand. So it's like a micro course or a micro class. I mean, I don't want people to see it like school or workers, but it is like the true gist of family essential education. These types of concepts being understood by everybody in the family, even at an elementary form. And then when they get older, you can read Bastiat. You can read Spooner. You can read these different intellects who have brought these ideas and dropped them off during their lifetime for us, right? And you're leaving this whole cornucopia of content. It's like an encyclopedia for a family. So is it unfair to ask you what your favorite book is?
It's like asking a parent what is I'll tell you. I got
a bunch of them that I think are great, but which one's yours?
For me, it's Fate of the Future. So Fate of the Future was this is our 9th book in the series.
There you go.
Yep. And when Elijah so each of these children's books, as you were just pointing out, Richard, they're each based on a classic or important, book or essay. We want to basically take the core ideas from some of the, great works out there and then turn them into a fun kid's story where they're getting exposure to some of these different principles and ideas. And so we've done that with, The Creature from Jekyll Island, all about the Fed, and Atlas Shrugged, and Economics in One Lesson, and, Road to Serfdom, and a whole bunch of others. But we wanted to do Rothbard. And, for us, Anatomy of the State was kind of one of the most impactful ones. And we thought, man, what would that look like to be a kid's book? That is the kid's book. Fate of the Future takes the core ideas from Anatomy of the State, basically that the state is immoral, it is inherently evil, it is a monopolistic enterprise, it is basically a gang and nothing more. It's institutionalized gangs. And Rothbard pulls no punches. He's very clear that this is the anti-state manifesto. And so we're like, let's turn that into a kids version. And so we thought when we published that book, we thought that we would get so much flack. Like for us, we're like, this may be the last book we do because we may get like so much negative reaction, but we both believe these ideas and we feel like society, to really have a thriving society, we need to talk about how destructive the state is to creating, a positive, pluralistic, productive society. So we're like, okay, let's do the book. Let's just do it anyways and see what happens. Literally, we have had zero. We put that book out. Let me see. My copy is right here. What's the I think 2019? I want to say 2018. Okay, we put this book out in 2018. It's been 4 years. We have had zero comments on social media, via email, customer reviews, anyone talking about the core message and why it's a problem. And Elijah and I are just like astounded. Like, how have we not, pissed off all these people who, do they not know what we're talking about? We open the book like, no, we're very clear about like this being a problem and here's how to fix it. And we even get into like, we talk about at the end of all of our books, we have glossary of terms, like the different ideas that we presented in the book. We've got discussion questions. Here's the discussion question: is the existence of the state justified merely because people can vote for who controls it? Like this is a discussion to have with your kids. Here's number 2: what are some examples of significant challenges in our society and how they could be resolved without the state? And then finally, why are people often tempted to use coercion to get their way? Like these are like fundamental questions at the root of understanding the problem with the state. And we're inviting parents to talk to their 8-year-olds about it. And it's going great. And they're having amazing discussions. And the parents are like, wow, I never thought about this. Finally, I'll end here, right? I watch Shark Tank all the time. Religiously, every episode, I love it. And Mark Cuban, whenever there's a product that deals with like kids or pets, he often will comment. He's like, those are the 2 areas where adults will spend indiscriminate amounts of money. They'll be stingy when it comes to what they buy for themselves. But if it's like, oh, this will help my kid or this will, take my money. And we've seen that with the Tuttle Twins. If we go to a parent, we're like, here's Anatomy of the State, or here's Economics in One Lesson, or Atlas Shrugged. What's the likelihood that, Joe Blow, man on the street, is going to read the book? It's nil. It's a statistical anomaly. But if we instead say, hey, do you think it'd be important for your kids to get a well-rounded education about entrepreneurship, how inflation works, the importance of freedom, what markets are? Well, yeah, I want my kids to be critical thinkers. Yeah, I want. And so we bypass the parents' own kind of walls and resistance. We instead say, this is for your kid. Go read it with them. And because the parents' defenses are down and they're just doing fun reading time with their kids, the parents are absorbing a lot of these ideas often for the first time in their life. So where we started this whole thing as children's books, we now see them as family learning, like family educational resources, because we're going as much after the mom and dad as we are after the kids.
I think it's genius. And I think it's hilariously ironic that you and Elijah thought you were such edgelords with this book and you were waiting for the flack, and everybody you're right. It's late at night. Their defenses are down. So as long as you're putting wholesome ideas in front of the reader, they're going to read them and their kids are going to absorb it and they're going to absorb it themselves. So I see it as like the golden rule, but it's the golden rule delivered at a time when people can deal with it. Because if you come at them during the day with these ideas, they're very combative. They have emotional responses. But when you have it in the form of a children's book, it is very effective communication. The narrative, the glossary, the whole packaging of it is meant to embolden families for the rest of their lives. This is not trivial or, spur of the moment or like trendy information. This is actually 1800s philosophy and 1900s, literature and these sort of things that are being expounded upon. And you're right. No one has time to read Atlas Shrugged, let alone consume it philosophically and compare it and contrast it and then present it to their children. Like that's not in most parents' purview. You and I can do that, but most parents can't. And that's why what you bring to the table is I have massive value and I'm asking a very, very, small price for it. Right. And it's an offer that parents can't refuse. There are no better books being printed for kids in a series like this that I've seen. I mean,
No,
I've seen what's out there at Barnes and Noble and these places, and I go through and I'm like, I would not want any of these type of storylines in front of my child. And these are storylines that I not only want in front of me, my wife, my son, but in front of everybody else that I interact with, because I find those are the people with integrity, with ethics, and they're not invalid ethics. They're actually doing things and getting the results they're seeking with the intention of improving other people's lives. So I think it's like foundational stones that parents can build the house upon. And I think everyone else is building on sand. And there's plenty of evidence to that effect.
I love that you kind of contrast like the man who built his house on the rock versus the sand, like the foundational stones that like even you mentioned the golden rule a minute ago, right? Here's another example. Parents will teach the golden rule maybe in their, Bible studies or just, outright or whatever. So that's like the superficial idea, I would say. It's a very powerful one. But then we have a book called The Tuttle Twins and the Golden Rule, where we're like, okay, let's leverage the golden rule, right? Parents want their kids to learn this idea. But what is the golden rule? It's just the inverse of the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle is don't harm other people, don't do bad things to them. But then, the other side of it is, okay, let's just not leave everyone alone to like do nothing. Let's actually create the society. The Gandhi, famous quote that he allegedly said, be the change you wish to see. We talk about blowback. We talk about, the fact that there are these aggressive wars happening all over the place. We talk about revenge. And so we can leverage a principle like the golden rule that every parent wants their kids to understand and say, let's get beyond just the superficial idea about like, yay, do nice things to people. Let's talk about the political and economic ramifications of that idea. Let's talk about how, when Ron Paul was booed on stage in 2008, in South Carolina for daring to suggest that, governments should live according to the golden rule. How would we like it if China was doing to us what, we were doing to others? Maybe we ought to consider the golden rule in foreign policy when it comes to how governments operate, when it comes to how voters, like, should I be taxing, voting for a tax for my neighbors to pay for me to, take my kids to, soccer program? I wouldn't like it if they did it for their pet project. And so these are very significant ideas that have a lot of ramification or relevance to our world. It just requires the right mechanism, the right delivery vehicle to help kids understand these beyond just that surface level. It's not just the golden rule. It's like, oh my gosh, what does that mean for the election that's happening right now? Or what does that mean for the bond that voters are considering? What does it mean for, what's happening in the schools and the garbage in the libraries there? Like, how do we take an issue like this at surface level and deepen a child's understanding of it so that they can be applying it more on a daily basis and see how it's relevant to their lives, how it's relevant to what's happening in the news? Then it's more than just a talking point they once read in a book. Suddenly these stories give them a reference point. So when mom and dad are listening to the radio, on the way to the grocery store and someone says something, the kids are like, wait a minute, that's, I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten in recent months from parents that are being like, my kids won't stop talking in the car about inflation because the news said this about inflation. And they're like, oh, thanks a lot, Federal Reserve, and just like those simple understandings that kids have that reference point that other kids don't get. So that is the whole motivation behind the Tuttle Twins, is to plant a lot of those seeds, expose kids through storytelling to a lot of these ideas so that they can then connect those dots in the real world and have amazing discussions and insights about them in a very practical way, and not just this kind of academic learning that they may have had.
Well, I think everything that you're doing in this area, including you want to talk about your book about people making decisions on college. There was the two books, and you mentioned one of them.
Oh yeah, the other one is, I've written a bunch of others too. This one was Skip College, John Taylor Gatto. This was the last thing he wrote before he passed away. He contributed a chapter to this book talking about his observations about higher education. And so this has his chapter as well as several other people. So we got John there and other contributors as well, making the case for, like, the big problem I've seen is especially homeschoolers. They'll be like, oh, we're off the conveyor belt. And then they put their kids back on the conveyor belt when it comes to college. And so the idea behind the book is like, okay, skip college for most people. But even if you're going to go, have eyes wide open, be very intentional about it. Recognize the downsides. Here's some mitigation strategies to make sure you save money, save time, don't get subjected to propaganda and all the rest. So it's really just a pitch. Again, that warning sign on the conveyor belt. So as kids are going by, it's like, your counselor in high school is going to be pushing you to go to college. Your parents might be as well. here's a warning sign, read this book and maybe you'll come up with some ideas about other opportunities.
Well, I know it's actually, I think 2 years ago today, he passed away. After working with John on the Ultimate History Lesson, I got to spend a lot of quality time with him. I remember him working on the chapter for your book. I'm glad he was able to get it finished. It was the last thing he finished before he passed away. And here's how I'll tie that together. Gandhi said that in order for the world to appreciate our situation, we have to show them the totality of the brutality that the British are putting on us, right? You have to make that visible so people can actually make decisions. John did that with his books. What I like about your work is you've come in, you've seen that problem that John left us, and you said, I got a solution for parents and children and egress out of this situation. So I think he'd be very proud of this whole menagerie of magnificent writing that families can enjoy. I think they're classics, each in their own right. And I'm choked up, man. Thank you, Connor, for getting me on the spot.
No, you're choking me up. I'm having the feels right now because John's work has been so deeply persuasive to me. He's the reason I homeschooled my kids. I read Dumbing Us Down, and I felt like he wrote that book for me. I felt like these are all the problems I had in school, every single one of them. And I felt that's when like some of the dots started connecting. I gave my fiance at the time the book. I'm like, we got to homeschool, and she got on board. I owe him a lot for just my own understanding. And so like one of our books, The Education Vacation, is based off of his book, The Underground History of American Education. And so he's a featured character in this book. I wanted to make sure that we did a Tuttle Twins book all honoring him. And so we've got him, speaking to the crowd here, talking to everyone and teaching his ideas to the new generation, because his experience and his ideas shouldn't die with him. Thankfully, with the Tuttle Twins, they're not going to, and you and others who have been connected to his work continue to preach the good word. It's fun to see the legacy that someone can build. It's something I hope for myself, for my own legacy, but I love being able to honor John's, because for so many of us, he was that warning sign to say like, hey, let's consider something different. And we need to carry his message forward. We're all on the education vacation now. All right. So where can people support you, Connor? You're an entrepreneur, you got a growing family, you're doing everything on like the up and up ethics, integrity in your marketing, form and function. Everything you say is how you roll. I like it. I like your style. How can people support you and get started on that education vacation? Well, TuttleTwins.com is where you want to go to get the books. They are on Amazon, but we offer a better deal and free workbooks and all kinds of stuff. We've got, as I said, books for teens. We've got books for toddlers. We've got a game and curriculum and a podcast and all kinds of stuff. So TuttleTwins.com, there's a products link where you can see everything that we have. We're going to be running a big Black Friday deal. We're always running big sales. And so we just invite people to follow us on social media, check out the website, get on the email list, buy some books, start reading with your kids. Ultimately, like we do all this through a nonprofit. For us, it is not about kind of a capitalist for-profit thing, although I don't knock that at all. I'm very pro-profit. But in our case, we reinvest the proceeds as much as we can into marketing, because for us, it's all about just reaching and growing the audience. And so by buying the books from us, you're helping us reinvest that money, continue to reach even more kids, get the books into schools and the libraries, which we're really big on right now. Because I look around at the world right now and I'm like, people need this message. We need to fix these problems. And so if you want to be a part of that, check out TuttleTwins.com and get your family a set of these books. All right. Thank you so much, Connor, for taking time out of your busy schedule. And I want to invite you back again, because I feel this is just an introductory conversation for the audience. Now people are going to start reading your books, and we're going to have you back in the near future. Let's do it. All right. Thank you. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are
coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come